How's it going, folks? Stu here.
It's the big one. 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 The big one.
Folks, Denis Villeneuve's new film Dune is finally out in cinemas. I thought I'd skip it. I wasn't really feeling it. Yeah, fucking of course I've seen it. So Dune, as I said, is the latest Villeneuve film. A director I adore, and I know a load of you adore. I mean, he's just the best. He just doesn't seem to miss whenever he swings. And this is his very sort of Denis Villeneuve-y sci-fi take on a supposedly unadaptable novel in the form of Frank Herbert's Dune, which is an old sci-fi novel which has paved the ground for so much in the world of sci-fi. I mean, we wouldn't have Star Wars, for one, without that novel. I've never read it. I've never seen the David Lynch version, although I feel like that needs to get quite high up on my watch list now that I've just learned that Sting was in it. And I'm sure I don't need to explain that this thing was building up hype like no one's business. This thing was like snowballing through the pandemic. Like, when's it going to come out? And how the fuck do I see it immediately? It's finally out. I saw it on IMAX, and oh boy, yes. Yes, 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 yes. And then a little bit more yes on top. Where to start with Dune? This thing is almost overwhelming in every aspect of what Villeneuve has pulled off and put together here on screen for us. It's big, it's loud, it's grand, it has an insane sense of scale, but it's nonetheless insanely impressive and never just not astonishing. The guy knows how to create these huge, detailed and rich, out of this world worlds. There's a lot of information that we need to be taught as an audience for this film to work, even remotely, even on the smallest level, which can be a lot to take in, especially like me, if you're someone that hasn't read the novel or seen anything about Dune previous to this. And I think Villeneuve does a fantastic job overall of adapting this thing in a way which means that you're being delivered that information and the big exposition drops that this film needs in a way which on the whole feels earned and feels engaging and interesting, as opposed to just feeling like we're having someone read pages of like, right, just to fill you guys in, so these guys are called this, these are not an easy feat. And I don't know if it's pulled off perfectly. We'll get onto that a little bit later in the review. But thankfully a filmmaker like Villeneuve knows how to weave it all together in a way which is just absorbing as absolute hell. It's basically about a boy from a very prominent house in the galaxy, or the Imperium as it's called in the film, and we basically follow him as he learns a bit more about his place in the Imperium, which obviously at this point sounds very generic in the world of sci-fi and in the world of big action blockbusters. But firstly, you have to remember that this is obviously a story from before a lot of the bigger sci-fi films that have made it feel cliche have come out and have been inspired by it. So there's that. But also, I obviously don't want to spoil much, but the story isn't really about that in the way you'd think it'd be about that. Especially in the way it sort of approaches this kind of chosen one and white savior narrative that we've seen done times before. I love the way that this film is sort of pulling that apart and dissecting it, but it does it in a way which is really, really interesting in that it uses the building blocks of that chosen one narrative enough for it to work on that narrative level at its base, but then pulls it apart, critiques it, and dissects it enough to make it feel more engaging than other versions of that chosen one story we've seen before. And it's got an insane cast as well, who all deliver brilliantly in their performances and their separate roles. The standouts for me, obviously Timmy. So Lil Timmy Tim was never going to disappoint me. I love the man, but he works really, really well in this central role. And again, in that same way that it's sort of using the tropes of the chosen one narrative and pulling it apart at the same time. I think it's almost kind of genius casting someone like Timothée Chalamet, who is very much a sort of chosen one boy of the moment, I guess, but he's got a lot more to him as an actor, and I think he taps in really well to this sense of someone that's just constantly learning throughout this film. But another big standout for me was Rebecca Ferguson, who I loved in films before. She's done some great work previously, but she really, really worked in this film as Timothée Chalamet's mother, Lady Jessica. She just brings a lot of the emotion in this film, I found. She was the character that I connected with mostly out of the entire cast. She's so good, and actually her and Timothée Chalamet have some of my favourite sort of acting chemistry in the film, so that was nice. Oscar Isaac's in the film as well, obviously brilliant. Not my favourite role from him, but he serves his character very, very well. Josh Brolin's there. His character I was expecting a bit more from, and I have no doubt that's going to be addressed in the part 2 that will be coming out, but I enjoyed him in there, even if he did sort of play the Josh Brolin character that you'd expect to see him play in a film. Stellan Skarsgård as the Baron was kind of entirely fucking sinister and made my skin crawl. One of those roles where he's covered in prosthetics and often you're like, oh, he's looking gross, isn't he? And then his face will turn to camera and you're like, Stellan! Kind of love roles like that. It's always fun. But weirdly and surprisingly, one of the biggest standouts for me I found was Jason Momoa. And I don't say that in the sense that I haven't liked his performances before or that I don't like the guy as an actor, but he was the character that I was just expecting to be the most sort of like, oh, I know what I'm going to get from Jason Momoa in a big action blockbuster. And in many ways, I sort of suppose he just does do that, but I just loved the guy. I just thought he was really, really great in this role. All of the characters feel lived in and feel part of different worlds in the grander world of Dune, which is perhaps one of the more obvious things you need to get right in a big sci-fi epic blockbuster. But you'd be surprised how often those things just come off as a bit weird and a bit forced. And the world is big. I feel like I'm saying it over and over, but I feel like I need to reiterate. It's huge. It's a big world. And I think that's one of the reasons why on first viewing, I was admittedly somewhat disappointed in it as a film. And I don't mean that to say that I didn't like the thing. I loved it. I was absolutely captivated by the visuals and the experience of watching Dune on first watch in IMAX. But coming out of that first screening, I did feel a little bit overwhelmed just with the sheer volume of stuff that's going on in this film. But on second watch, in a way which I was expecting, but I'm happy to say does happen, or at least happen for me, I was able to focus a bit more on the themes and sort of the through lines of the film. And that made it much more rewarding for me as well. And there's certain things which I really, really click with a lot more on the second one. One of those is this sort of central relationship between mother and son. And I actually think that's the driving relationship in the film. It really, really worked for me big time on the second watch in a much more emotionally engaging way. On the first watch, some of those big emotional beats felt like they were lacking something. They were lacking those punches. On second watch, they really, really worked. And a lot of the stuff that happens in the second half of the film between Lady Jessica and Paul was really, really emotionally effective. I sort of felt myself getting quite choked up at it. And it weaves really well into this sort of savior, chosen one narrative arc that the film sets up. And I love the way that this film suggests that maybe that's not quite what's going on here. But that idea that these prophecies are sort of sown by specific people for specific needs, and so what is and isn't the actual prophecy and what does and doesn't come true is a really, really interesting theme, and is again a theme which really, really came out on second watch when I was able to watch all of these visions knowing where they were going. And I love what Villeneuve does with the visions in this film. They're not only just some of the more sort of prettier abstract aspects of the film, which I always tend to attach myself much more to. They serve a really interesting purpose in keeping the audience sort of guessing what's going on, but also really interestingly explore the conflicts of that chosen one theory and what's going on in Paul's head. I haven't even talked really about the visuals from an aesthetic sense or the music, and I need to do that before this review's over. Sorry, this is the world's longest review ever. The visuals of this film, I mean, wow, how on earth? Every shot of this thing is gorgeous, and every shot has this insane sense of scale, and it's done in such a great way which just feels really sort of natural, if that makes sense. Like, it doesn't ever feel like we're watching big sets or big sort of expensive large budgeted movie moments, although obviously we are, that's how filmmaking works. It genuinely feels like we're watching this world, like we're watching things happening on Arrakis. It might as well be a documentary in Arrakis, this film. Every shot just feels so grounded, but also like, holy sweet fuck, this is crazy. And that's definitely helped as well by the score, which does a very good amount of heavy lifting in this sort of epicness of this film. It's crazy big. I mean, Hans Zimmer is Hans Zimmer. No one's going into a film scored by Hans Zimmer like, maybe we won't hear the score. You know, maybe we should turn it up a bit. But good heavens, this thing was loud. It's really, really interestingly woven into a lot of the moments of the film, especially all those sort of vision sequences. It does a lot of driving of the narrative outside of all of the lines of dialogue and exposition we're getting elsewhere. And I love the way that Hans Zimmer weaves in different elements like voices. There's throat singing in there. There's bloody bagpipes. So why the fuck not Hans? It's just an incredibly eclectic score in terms of its sounds and its inspirations, but it's also a very focused score as well, and it knows what it's trying to deliver, and it just does it and goes for it. But, and much like the very secretive and never released edition of everyone's favorite 2019 musical Cats, there is a but. There are a few things that do still bug me about the film, and I thought they would drop out a bit more than they did on rewatch. in the same way that some of the things I've already said did disappear for me on rewatch. But there are one too many lines in a lot of scenes, especially in the front half of this thing, where it just feels like almost one line too many. Like it almost feels like it's done the groundwork on some really interesting delivering of exposition, and then it will just have to have one further line just to sort of ride that home. And in that line, it sort of loses me a little bit. One example out of a few to name one for you. There's a scene at the beginning where Josh Brolin's character is training Timothée Chalamet's character. They're fighting, and it's explaining how the shield system works that they have. And Villeneuve really effectively and very concisely visually shows the fact that a quick move is going to get deflected by the shield, and a slow, sharp move makes it go red and will inevitably get through the shield and kill someone. He shows this and doesn't tell it. And then Josh Brolin, mid-fight, just sort of says, a slow move will get you through the shield. Paraphrasing a little bit, but maybe not even that much. And that is a very obvious example of what I'm talking about there. It's like, you've just shown it, and we can pick up on that. We don't need someone to just turn around and say it to us. But it happens a few times, and I don't think it's just exposition being exposition, and everyone loves to go, I felt like I was watching exposition, bad film. I think it is just sort of occasionally kind of poor writing, which is frustrating because so much of the exposition in this film is very, very well delivered. Like, there's a sequence where we're learning about the sandworms because we're in a cockpit with a group of people that are learning about the sandworms, and it works perfectly, and it's a stunning sequence, and we get everything we need to know in an exhibit of how to do exposition dialogue. But it's just a shame that there are then these moments which just felt like a little bit of a frustration for me. But honestly, even though there are a few things I didn't like in the film, this thing is just an astonishing accomplishment and an unbelievable experience. I loved this thing and I adored this thing despite the problems I have with it. Like, it's not perfect, but I don't feel like that in itself is a negative of the film. Like, there's loads of films that aren't perfect, but it just fucking works when it needs to work. And the things that I love about this film, I really, really, truly love about this film. And I know this is a bit of a cliche at this point, but I truly hope that there's like a director's cut coming, just so that I can get more Villeneuve Dune content in the interim waiting between 1 and 2. And also because there's clearly a lot more to this. I refuse to believe that there isn't like a 4-hour cut of this thing that can go out into the world. Do it, Warner Brothers. Do it. But what about you guys? Have you seen Dune yet? You probably have. You probably got some thoughts on it. Let me know what you thought about it down in the comments down below. We'll have a little chat. Very sorry about how long and rambly this review probably has ended up. I quickly realized there's no real coherent way for me to get my thoughts out on this, so I just talked at you. But if you did enjoy that, go ahead and click subscribe, because guess what? I do this a lot, and there's a whole butt ton more film reviews to drop on the channel in the rest of the year. So make sure you're subscribed and you're not missing any of those. It just makes sense, right? I'll see you guys soon for some more thoughts on more films. But until next time, can we just make sure that Hayden Christensen doesn't ever see this film? Because I just can't imagine he's going to enjoy it.